2 Samuel chapter 13, verse 1. Now David's son Absalom had a beautiful sister named Tamar, and Amnon, her half-brother, fell desperately in love with her. Verse 2. Amnon became so obsessed with Tamar that he became ill. She was a virgin, and Amnon thought he could never have her. Verse 3. But Amnon had a very crafty friend, his cousin Jonadab. He was the son of David's brother Shimeah. Verse 4. One day Jonadab said to Amnon, "What's the trouble? Why should the son of a king look so dejected morning after morning?" So Amnon told him, "I am in love with Tamar, my brother Absalom's sister." Verse 5. Well, Jonadab said, "I will tell you what to do. Go back to bed and pretend you are ill. When your father comes to see you, ask him to let Tamar come and prepare some food for you. Tell him, you will feel better if she prepares it as you watch and feeds it with her own hands." Verse 6. So Amnon lay down and pretended to be sick. When the king came to see him, Amnon asked him, "Please, let my sister Tamar come and cook my favorite dish as I watch. Then I can eat it from her own hands." Verse 7. So David agreed and sent Tamar to Amnon's house to prepare some food for him. Verse 8. When Tamar arrived at Amnon's house, she went to the place where he was lying down so he could watch her mix some dough. Then she baked his favorite dish for him. Verse 9. But when she set the serving tray before him, he refused to eat. "Everyone, get out of here," Amnon told his servant. So they all left. Verse 10. Then he said to Tamar, "Now bring the food into my bedroom and feed it to me here." So Tamar took his favorite dish to him. Verse 11. But as she was feeding him, he grabbed her and demanded, "Come to bed with me, my darling sister." Verse 12. "No, my brother," she cried. "Don't be foolish. Don't do this to me. Such wicked things aren't done in Israel." Verse 13. "Where could I go in my shame? And you would be called one of the greatest fools in Israel. Please, just speak to the king about it, and he will let you marry me." Verse 14. But Amnon wouldn't listen to her, and since he was stronger than she was, he raped her. Verse 15. Then suddenly Amnon's love turned to hate, and he hated her even more than he had loved her. "Get out of here," he snarled at her. Verse 16. No, no," Tamar cried. "Sending me away now is worse than what you have already done to me." But Amnon wouldn't listen to her. Verse 17. He shouted for his servant and demanded, "Throw this woman out and lock the door behind her." Verse 18. So the servant put her out and locked the door behind her. She was wearing a long, beautiful robe, as was the custom in those days for the king's virgin daughters. Verse 19. But now Tamar tore her robe and put ashes on her head, and then, with her face in her hands, she went away crying. Verse 20. Her brother Absalom saw her and asked, "Is it true that Amnon has been with you?" "Well, my sister, keep quiet for now. Since he's your brother, don't worry about it." So Tamar lived as a desolate woman in her brother Absalom's house. Verse 21. When King David heard what had happened, he was very angry. Verse 22. And though Absalom had never spoke to Amnon about this, he hated Amnon deeply because of what he had done to his sister. Verse 23. 2 years later, when Absalom's sheep were being sheared at Baal-Hazor near Ephraim, Absalom invited all the king's sons to come to a feast. Verse 24. He went to the king and said, "My sheep shearers are now at work. Would the king and his servant please come to celebrate the occasion with me?" Verse 25. The king replied, "No, my son. If we all came, we would be too much of a burden on you." Absalom pressed him, but the king would not come, though he gave Absalom his blessing. Verse 26. Well, then, Absalom said, "If you can't come, how about sending my brother Amnon with us?" "Why Amnon?" the king asked. Verse 27, but Absalom kept on pressing the king until he finally agreed to let all his sons attend, including Amnon. So Absalom prepared a feast fit for a king. Verse 28, Absalom told his men, "Wait until Amnon gets drunk, then at my signal, kill him. Don't be afraid. I'm the one who has given the command. Take courage and do it." Verse 29, so at Absalom's signal, they murdered Amnon. Then the other sons of the king jumped on their mules and fled. Verse 30, as they were on their way back to Jerusalem, this report reached David: "Absalom has killed all the king's sons. Not one is left alive." Verse 31, the king got up, tore his robe, and threw himself on the ground. His advisers also tore their clothes in horror and sorrow. Verse 32, but just then Jonadab, the son of David's brother Shimeah, arrived and said, "No, don't believe that all the king's sons have been killed. It was only Amnon. Absalom have been plotting this ever since Amnon raped his sister Tamar." Verse 33, "No, my lord the king, your sons aren't all dead. It was only Amnon." Verse 34, meanwhile, Absalom escaped. Then the watchman on the Jerusalem wall saw a great cloud coming down the hill on the road from the west. He ran to tell the king, "I see a crowd of people coming from Horonim road along the side of the hill." Verse 35, look, Jonadab told the king, "There they are now. The king's sons are coming, just as I said." Verse 36, they soon arrived, weeping and sobbing, and the king and all his servants wept bitterly with them. Verse 37, and David mourned many days for his son Amnon. Absalom fled to his grandfather Tamar, son of Ammihud, the king of Geshur. Verse 38, he stayed there in Geshur for 3 years. Verse 39, and King David, now reconciled to Amnon's death, longed to be reunited with his son Absalom. Amen.